Wellington Zoo plays a major role in conservation around New Zealand. From the deep south to the blustery centre and beyond, we work to ensure the wildlife you've met continues to thrive for generations to come.
So what we'd like to do is show the difference you've made for New Zealand wildlife just by visiting Wellington Zoo today. By supporting zoo-based conservation, you're playing your own role in protecting New Zealand's beautiful, exciting and utterly unique natural world.
As a safe, controlled environment, Wellington Zoo is ideally placed to take part in conservation breeding programs. Not only can we build up the number of endangered animals to be restored to the wild, but we can keep insurance populations just in case a species finds itself in particularly dire straits. Grand and Otago skinks are two species that Wellington Zoo is playing its part in protecting.
The grand skinks and the Otago skinks are some of the most special and distinctive skinks that we have in New Zealand. They are amongst the rarest we have, being classified as nationally critically endangered, which puts them in the same realm as the kakapo. They live in primarily tussock upland areas, and they really utilise the schist rock outcroppings that occur in those areas, and they rely on those schist rocks as refuge, as part of their home environment, and without them they probably wouldn't exist there anymore.
Wellington Zoo is part of the Grand and Otago skink recovery program. We hold pairs of grand skinks and Otago skinks here at the zoo, and we aim to breed those skinks. The offspring of those pairings would go back out into the wild, or form an insurance population within zoos that would either be transferred between zoos to maintain genetics or form the insurance population.
Back in the 1990s, Doc conducted a study at Macrae's Flat area on the grand skinks and Otago skinks, and found through the study that their numbers were declining, and if that decline was not halted, then they'd become functionally extinct within around 10 years' time.
So zoos hold an insurance population where we manage the genetics and produce offspring. If something were to happen in the wild, we could repopulate the wild with these offspring, or hold on to that safety net until it is safe to reintroduce.
Nearly every grand and Otago skink in a zoo today has come through Wellington Zoo for medical screening and identification.
Tuatara are a precious New Zealand taonga, or treasure. While they're almost completely absent from the mainland, they're thriving on offshore islands. One particular island that Wellington Zoo has a connection with is Long Island in Marlborough.
The tuatara are special because they're the last survivor of an entire order of reptiles, the Rhynchocephalia. Now there were other species of this group living many, many years ago, and there are fossils that have been found in other parts of the world, but the tuatara is the only one that survived, and only here in New Zealand. So they're unique to us. And even in New Zealand, unfortunately, because of the introduction of mammals that came with people, the tuatara has only survived on 32 offshore islands, so it's not even naturally living on the mainland anymore. One of the things we do to help to boost their numbers is use captive incubation, where we take eggs from females in the wild and we incubate them at the university and hatch them out. By doing this, we increase the success of hatching by almost, well, probably double in the best cases.
At Wellington Zoo, we've done many things with tuatara over a very long extended period of time. We've supported the species coordinator for 16 or 17 years now, and they manage all the genetics of all the tuatara that are in human care around the world. We also looked after a population of Brothers Island tuatara, where we grew them up for 5 years from hatchlings to animals large enough to be released into the wild. So young tuatara and even tuatara eggs are where they're most prone to predation. So things like cats and ferrets and stoats and rats all prey on very young tuatara and their eggs. So by hatching the eggs in human care and then rearing the animals up till they're big enough, that allows them to have a much better chance of survival in the wild.
Wellington Zoo was great. They stepped up and offered to build a purpose-built enclosure to rear these young tuatara, because at the university we hatched them indoors and we kept them indoors initially, but the healthiest place for them to be is outdoors, where they get natural temperatures and natural weather. And so we like to rear them outdoors where they can kind of practice living in the wild. It's like, we call it Head Start, and they have semi-natural conditions where even though they get given food to eat, they kind of hunt it themselves and they learn to dig their burrows. Releasing young animals to the wild after putting so much into rearing them and looking after them is just incredibly satisfying, and I think that goes for everyone that was involved.
Tuatara are so unique, they're so interesting, they're different to anything else in the world. They haven't changed for nearly millions of years, that you can look at them and just see what life would have been like such a long time ago.
In 2002, a founder population of North Island kaka, some from zoos, were released into Zealandia. Today, they're a common sight throughout the city.
The Kaka program has been more successful than we ever expected. We've established a really secure breeding population in the sanctuary, and they are breeding outside. There are a few challenges if they breed outside the fence, but there's no doubt that there are a number of birds that are being produced out there, and it's fantastic because it's in people's backyards and they see these wonderful birds flying around.
In the last 10 years or so, there's been a massive boom in wild kaka numbers. I mean, just this morning I saw several flying overhead, and I don't think a day goes by working at the zoo that you don't see kaka.
Kaka are really curious birds. They're also incredibly funny. They'll check things out. We call them our acrobats or our clowns. They'll fly around, they'll climb all through the forest. They're just hilarious to watch. They're neat birds.
To get Kaka established in the sanctuary, we started with captive reared young birds, and Wellington Zoo gave us a clutch of 3. We banded our 600th chick this last season.
Well, I think it's important to recognise that our keepers here are highly skilled specialists in the areas of animal welfare and husbandry, not just for birds but for all species. And I think this is being more and more recognised as a vital part of any conservation effort.
It's important to bring the kaka back into everyone's lives. We want to see them flying around in flocks all through the Wellington region, just like they were many years before predators came in and before we got rid of a lot of their habitat. They can survive with us and they're doing really well. Let's see them come back.
Well, I'm extremely proud to be involved in any conservation program that Wellington Zoo is part of. But I think the kaka one is extra rewarding, and that's really because it's such a tangible result. The fact that you can walk around Wellington and see wild kaka flying overhead, nesting in the trees, is a great example that it works.
While there are many fantastic organisations and individuals working to conserve our local wildlife, having our communities involved makes our chances of success that much greater. We encourage our visitors to take action in simple but effective ways.
The korora, or little blue penguins, at Wellington Zoo were found injured in the wild and brought to the nest tekohanga for treatment. Their injuries mean they can't return to the Wellington coast, but they make wonderful advocates for their wild counterparts.
Little blue penguins are special, particularly for Wellington. They're an icon. We're the only capital city known to have a resident penguin population, and that's unique for New Zealand. We don't have many opportunities to have our wild animals living amongst us. They are quite special too in that they're a relic. They're the sole survivor of a class of ancient penguins, which includes the world's smallest penguin, but also the giant penguins, birds that were taller than you or I.
Wellington Zoo has been partnering with Forest and Bird for a number of years in the Places for Penguins project, and we've been monitoring nest boxes around the Wellington Harbour. We're really lucky to have penguins in our city at Wellington, and there's a few things we can choose to do in our everyday life that make it a little bit easier for penguins out there to thrive. The Take the Lead, Save Our Korora campaign is a very exciting community engagement campaign we've developed jointly with Forest and Bird. So the campaign aims to reach out to dog owners and dog walkers to let them know how easy it is to save our penguin population by keeping your dog on the lead when walking around the coast.
In Wellington, there are about 700 to 800 birds, we think, around the harbour and southern coast. About 600 of those are on Matu Soames Island, and they're doing well.
It's really exciting to be able to work on a species that is right out there in your doorstep. I think that's a very unique thing that we get in Wellington City, being surrounded by so much biodiversity, being able to work on something that you can see the effects and the interactions changing every day.
Protecting wildlife means having consistent messaging throughout the conservation community. We're working with partners around the country to make Kiwi conservation accessible to every New Zealander.
There's nothing else like Kiwi in the world. They're unique in the world. They're only found in New Zealand. They are a very ancient group of birds here. They're flightless. They are much more like a mammal in that regard. They've got hairy feathers, a huge egg. They have got an amazing sense of smell, which is quite unusual for birds. and with that, a very, very high level of intelligence. So they are like parrots without wings. That's the uniqueness in terms of biology. They are also uniquely placed as a bird New Zealanders identify with. We call ourselves Kiwi, they are our currency. You can hardly walk past 100 meters on the street before you see a symbol of a Kiwi. They are what unites people's thoughts about New Zealand nature, New Zealand wildlife, and so they are also a beacon for conservation. Protection of Kiwi is everybody's business, and so there are aspects that people can do that are professional conservationists, putting up large landscape scale predator management. But even to have support for this requires somebody to care. And to care, you actually need to know. And to know, you have to see and believe. And it's very difficult to see Kiwi in the wild, even where they are widespread still. They are nocturnal, they're very shy, and so most people will have never seen a Kiwi. Wellington Zoo and other places like Wellington Zoo provide a unique opportunity for this contact to be made and for people to actually understand, New Zealanders to understand what part of our heritage is.
We're really lucky here at the zoo that a whole bunch of people come and visit us every single year. And so one of the ways that we contribute to saving animals in the wild is actually harnessing the power of that group of visitors. If each one of those people that came and saw us did one small thing to the benefit of the environment or animals, then that actually adds up to make a really big difference. So recently, we've had a really good opportunity to lead the way in Kiwi conservation. What we did is we wrote a national strategy for zoos in New Zealand about how to engage their communities with the protection of Kiwi. This strategy really aimed to get all zoos and wildlife parks that hold Kiwi in New Zealand working together on 3 simple goals. The first is that we really just wanted to make people have memorable experiences with Kiwi that fostered that love and caring for our national icon. The second part was about trying to encourage communities to be responsible pet owners. And they can do that really simply by keeping their cats inside at night and their dogs on leads in wild areas.
Because dogs are such a big aspect of management for Kiwi, it is possible in places like Wellington Zoo to tell that story, to connect with dog owners, to connect with neighbors of dog owners and with whole communities, and to explain, to tell the story as it really is. And it's not an easy story to tell, but once you are captivated by the animal, you are also keen to hear what is going on. And Wellington Zoo is one of those places to tell the story well.
The final part of the strategy is about us as zoos really promoting the awesome work that is happening out there in the wild for the protection of Kiwi. It is really exciting to work on this kind of strategy. It's an opportunity for us to be able to not just do something as one organisation, but collectively do something as a whole bunch of organisations working together for the same end goal.
Conservation needs to be approached from many different angles in order for us all to be successful. To save animals in the wild, it's important that we support the passionate people who devote their time and dedication to securing a future for endangered species.
Kia inhabit one of the most rugged and challenging environments in New Zealand. In order to protect these charismatic animals, you need to have the drive and passion to pit yourself against that environment. The people at Kia Conservation Trust embody that New Zealand conservation spirit.
Kia are a really unique New Zealand species. They're highly intelligent, only mountain parrot in the world, and they're really unusual in that they're highly charismatic and really engaged and want to interact with people. Well, the Kia Conservation Trust was set up in 2006 and it has 2 main aims. Firstly, to work protecting Kia in the wild, and also to increase advocacy and welfare potential in the captive facilities around New Zealand. We've got a really great relationship with Wellington Zoo, so they fund some of our nest monitoring work that we have happening down in the South Island. So at the moment we've got about 5 or 6 nest sites that we monitor every year, and we put nest cameras inside nest cavities that we know are active, and we follow them through the whole season so we can get an idea of productivity and survivorship of the birds.
So we give some financial support to the nest monitoring program, and we also go out there ourselves and help out. So staff from the zoo will go out to the South Island and help at different stages of the nest monitoring program. I was lucky enough to go there in 2014. Working with Kia in the field was the most challenging field work I've ever done. These are huge birds in a huge habitat, so trying to track a bird up a really steep hill really quickly and then potentially getting up there as the Kia had just flown off can be a really big challenge. All the field work that's been going on through the South Island, from the Arthur's Pass to Nelson Lakes and Kahurangi and all those Kia habitats, it helps us paint a picture of what's happening to the population as a whole. It's a very long-lived species, so it's always quite a challenge to look at how the population is doing when each individual has a very long life. And looking at their breeding and their nesting success and their fledging success and allowing to put trackers on those and follow them growing up allows us to have a much better picture of what's happening so that we can inform conservation management. At Wellington Zoo, we're very passionate about a joint approach to conservation. So we want to work with the population in human care and the population out there in the wild to make sure that we attain the best outcomes possible for the wild population to thrive and the species to survive.
Conservation doesn't just have to happen in the wildest places of New Zealand. Right here in Wellington City, people are hard at work building up our native biodiversity, learning how greening our lives can improve our well-being.
We supported an urban biodiversity project out of Victoria University thanks to a conservation fellowship supported by the Holdsworth Charitable Trust. And we really wanted to look at how people feel connected to nature and what that means to them, their well-being. Anecdotally, we all know that getting out in nature is great for us and we feel better when we do it, but it's really nice to have some research to prove that that's actually true.
Well, I'm actually interested in people's relationship with nature and how that might impact their well-being and their pro-environmental behaviour. The Wellington Zoo Conservation Fellowship provided some money for us to use to actually carry out a extensive survey across Wellington City. At present, about half the world's population lives in cities, and by 2050 the United Nations expects it to be up to 80%. And they're not all as beautiful as Wellington. So a lot of people, the only contact with nature they have is what's in their immediate environment. And that's important because research is beginning to confirm what we sort of instinctively know, that nature's good for us. And it's also really important in nurturing an empathy for nature, which underlies people's environmental concern and action.
At the zoo, we think it's really important for people to feel connected to nature. Nature is all around us and people are part of nature. We're not separate from it. Nature is not something that is out there, it is us and it is all around us. And Julie's research shows that a direct experience in nature makes people feel more connected to nature. So coming to the zoo is one of those direct experiences with nature. So if we can facilitate those, people will feel more connected to nature and then exhibit pro-environmental behaviours as a result of that.
In the last year, Wellington Zoo staff spent over 7,000 hours working for wildlife conservation. Staff are able to take a week of conservation leave and apply for funding from our conservation fund to pursue their own conservation passions and to lead the way in participating in field conservation.
So at Wellington Zoo we have two opportunities for our staff to support field conservation to save animals in the wild. The first is through conservation leave, so all of our staff have access to 1 week's leave if they want to go and work in a field conservation project that they actually love and want to support. And then the other opportunity is through our conservation fund, where they can apply for funding to actually go and work in a field conservation that we support as a zoo. And this could be for endangered or critically endangered animals, both locally and globally. So it's a fantastic opportunity for them to grow their professionalism, to really close the loop around the animals that we care for here at the zoo and their wild cousins, and that we can work to try and support our partners in delivering great conservation outcomes for those animals.
So for my conservation leave, I went down to Twizel to work with the Department of Conservation on their Kaki breeding program. Kaki, or black stilt, are a critically endangered wading bird. There's actually only about 65 pairs left in the wild. Kaki live on the braided rivers of the Mackenzie Basin, and they forage in the water for freshwater invertebrates. So that's things like little insects and bugs that live in the water. So they really rely on that fresh flowing water for their food source. When you go out into the field, I find you learn a lot of stuff, but it's also a good chance for you to be able to teach as well. So when I worked with the Kaka team, I picked up a lot of knowledge for myself that I could bring back to Wellington Zoo, but I also felt that I could contribute to them and help them out with what they were doing as well.
So Te Motukairangi Miramar Ecological Restoration is a project that I set up in late 2010, early 2011, when I thought there was a need for a restoration project to happen on Miramar. Basically, you're looking at a really awesome place, which is a peninsula with a very narrow land bridge, and possum had already been eradicated from the area, but nothing else was really going on, so that's when I decided that something was going to happen. So basically, we're focusing on planting areas back during winter and then removing the weeds during summertime. If you don't have the trees, you will not have the birds, and vice versa. And, you know, seeing animals just naturally coming back as well, but providing a safe area for them, you know, things like kakariki, kereru, and falcons and stuff like that, which has already been seen in the area.
The team at the Nest, Te Kohanga, are making a big difference to our native animals. As one of New Zealand's premier wildlife health centres, we're often called upon to take care of sick or injured native animals. When some of your patients are highly endangered, you need a lot of collaboration and expertise to get the best possible results, ensuring that they can return to their wild homes.
Wildlife health is actually really important for conservation because we're already out there looking after the wildlife, getting rid of the predators, giving them somewhere good to live, but we've got to make sure they're healthy at the same time. And so we have things that happen, and sometimes it's because we have small populations in a small area, or sometimes it's because a new disease comes into the country, but all those things can affect the wildlife that we've already kind of saved, and we've got to just keep them healthy and keep them going on. We're really lucky to have Wellington Zoo in the middle of the country as a fantastic resource for wildlife disease, veterinary care, diagnostics, but also advice on things as well. So apart from bringing animals in to just be fixed in the clinic, we also deal with the vets and the vet nurses and the husbandry experts in how to care for our wildlife when it's back out in the wild.
The Nest Te Kohanga is really an integral part of our success story in Wellington. They're our go-to people for advice when it comes to disease, when it comes to injuries, and what can we do about it. So over time there's been an accumulation of knowledge about how to treat them, which has been really valuable, not just for us, but actually for wildlife nationally. And that knowledge is being shared with other vets, and I think it's a fantastic resource for us. But I think in terms of conservation nationally, it's a real asset.
The Wellington Dock Office is really fortunate to have the Nest Te Kohanga here at Wellington Zoo, so easily accessible to our office. Almost every day we're receiving calls from the public who have found injured wildlife. So it might be a kereru's flown into somebody's window. We'll need to go out and respond to that call and pick up that kereru, but once we've got the bird, we're not able to take care of it. We don't have the expertise or the facilities. So we rely on the Nest Te Kohanga to be able to take that patient in, treat that kereru until it can be released back into the wild.
So on a day-to-day basis at the Nest, we admit quite a few native patients. On average, we'll admit between 400 to 450 annually. But what happens is the Department of Conservation or the SPCA or Zealandia or just our members of the community will be finding wildlife. So our main goal at the Nest Te Kohanga is to release these animals back into the wild in a very fit, healthy state. So the wild is a tough place for these animals, and so we need to make sure that they are 100% ready to be released so that they can survive and contribute to their species. So they need to breed and they need to forage for food. And so our goal is to fix them up so that we can get them back out there. And we can't fix them all, but we do have a really high success rate, and we get many of these animals back into the wild so that they can have a chance at survival.
Zoos are the third largest contributor to conservation in the world, a feat that's only made possible by visitors like you. Throughout the world, good zoos work together by sharing knowledge and expertise, as well as making sure that animal welfare and conservation are at the forefront of everything we do.
Wellington Zoo is a proud member of the Zoo and Aquarium Association Australasia, or ZAA, an organisation that represents over 100 zoos and aquariums throughout Australasia. ZAA holds its members to the highest standard of animal care. By supporting us, you're not only ensuring that we preserve our wild treasures for future generations, but that we do it while protecting their well-being.
Good zoos can really differentiate themselves in a number of ways, but supporting field conservation is definitely a major way that good zoos are quite different. So when people visit their local zoo, they should be able to find out how they're supporting conservation for animals in the wild. Across New Zealand, a lot of our good zoos support field conservation for animals that we think are very, very special for New Zealand's biodiversity.
Fundamentally, we all think of a bad zoo as someone that doesn't look after their animals properly. Let's face it, animal welfare is critical to zoos. But I think zoos should be aspiring to far more than that. You know, if we aren't educating our public, if we aren't acting in the conservation arena, then clearly we're not doing anything for the planet as a whole. So I think a good zoo is one that's, you know, it is clearly educating people, particularly about conservation. It's also in the arena of active conservation in the field. And also I would suggest that it should be active in research, particularly available for research, but research that again benefits the planet.
It's really important for zoos around the world to act in a collective way because we are greater than we are individually if we do it this way. And actually, the good zoos around the world actually contribute, they're the third highest contributor to field conservation on the planet, behind WWF Global and the Nature Conservancy. So when we pool our resources to support field conservation efforts, we are a powerhouse for conservation.
Yeah, I suppose the most obvious thing that zoos can do collectively is to manage successful programs for reintroducing animals into the wild. And by that I mean breeding animals on the zoo site and then putting them back into the wild location. And clearly it's far more effective if we can do that communally through zoos, i.e. through stud books and through proper coordination. We have a lot more space available to us through that mechanism than we can on an individual basis.
The future for zoos in the conservation space, I think, will become more and more important. We know that we're losing species. We know that probably 70% of known species will be gone by 2050. We don't want to dwell on the doom and gloom. We want to actually do something active and positive to help prevent that. So zoos play a major role, not only in the science aspect of managing species and working in the field, but we have so many people visit our zoos who actually want to do something. So we really do need to increase our advocacy for animals in the wild. We really need to connect people in terms of their love for animals. Let them love animals first. Let them love and support their zoo. And we as zoos, as good zoos, can actually lead the way in this conservation space.